Right now on the National Weather Desk, California deluge. Extreme rainfall floods roads and homes across Southern California, and more rain is in the forecast today. As Maine cleans up from its flooding, state leaders are wondering what they can do before the next flood. We'll explain what caused this thick fog to blanket western Washington and the factors that go into creating different shapes of snowflakes. Plus, hear from NORAD as they get ready to track Santa this weekend.
From our nation's capital, this is the National Weather Desk.
Good morning and welcome to the National Weather Desk. I'm meteorologist Matt Ritter. 1 year ago, Southern California was under a moderate to severe drought. Today, not only is the drought long gone, but persistent rainfall is flooding across the region. This is what the streets of Santa Barbara looked like on Thursday. Rushing water so deep it came up to this car's doors. It was a scene repeated across Southern California. The water also got into homes and businesses. The city of Oxnard got more than 3 inches yesterday morning, exceeding the average for all of December. And more rain is coming today. Our coverage begins with Jasmine Veal in Ventura County.
Homes in Port Hueneme flooded. The Vasquez family used a pot to scoop up the water after it swept into their house on Boulker Drive early Thursday after a massive amount of rain. The water filled the living room, around the Christmas tree, under beds, and through the kitchen. Gary Harbor's townhome on Hemlock Street also flooded.
It got to be maybe 4 to 6 inches deep in our living room, kitchen, downstairs bathroom. The whole downstairs was flooded.
This mom says she evacuated her home in the Beach City neighborhood Thursday morning.
It's a lot of rain that we're not used to, and it came just absolutely pounding and pouring down about 1 o'clock in the morning.
Pictures inside other Port Hueneme homes show presents floating on the muddy rainwater inside hallways and garages. The Ventura County Fire Department says dozens of homes were flooded.
You see water lines that are about chest high on me, so you're talking 4 feet, maybe higher than that.
City officials in Port Hueneme say they tried to prepare for the storm, but it was too much for the channels.
A lot of rain came in, about 3 inches in 45 minutes. Storm drain was coming in with high tide. Water was trying to go out.
Many residents say they do not have flood insurance. City officials say they have declared an emergency to get more resources to help with all of this water damage.
Rain video shows just how high the water got early this morning in this Port Hueneme senior living community. A wave of water splashed the camera lens as an emergency responder drove past the homes.
This is the water line right here.
Natalie Bayham stepped out of bed in her condo in Hueneme Bay around 3 a.m. and her feet were soaked.
All of this in here had 4 inches of water.
Fans are on high inside of Bayham's place.
The water came in and just pushed everything to this garage wall.
She lives about 200 feet from a flood channel. Officials say it overflowed during Thursday's deluge and led to 60 properties being evacuated in the neighborhood. Several of those people ended up at a Red Cross shelter at Oxnard College.
One of our disaster team, in fact, her home got flooded by about 18 inches. She's trying to get the water out. Unbelievable. She wants to come tonight, and it's like, Judy, just stay home.
Road closures, abandoned cars, and storm debris are clogging the streets in Santa Barbara. Local business owner Seth Taylor said the water near his company was over 3 feet high.
This is the water line.
The water got so high on Gutierrez and Rose Avenue that it floated lumber off the shelves and across the yard. Battalion Chief Corey Cloud says the Santa Barbara City Fire Department has rescued over a dozen people from stuck vehicles in flooded areas.
For the most part, all of our underpasses are flooded and are experiencing this sort of issue with multiple cars that have either driven through barricades or have driven through before barricades have come up.
And the threat of more flooding continues today, expanding to a larger area. Meteorologist Brian Vandegraff is here with details.
And we continue to keep an eye on that
Wet weather through portions of Southern California into the southwestern portion of the United States. You can see that rain circulating around, coming through Southern California, and now showers coming across the Baja and into portions of Arizona today. In fact, as you look at the maps here, we do have a slight level 2 risk for some flooding across portions from Palm Springs, Southern California, Lake Havasu City, Yuma, Arizona to Phoenix, including Tucson today, as they can see several inches of rain on top of some spots on already wet ground. Here's a look at that futurecast, taking you through time with those heavy bands swinging through all the way into the start of the weekend. By the time we get towards Christmas Eve, though, that moisture moves to the nation's midsection, and the South California coastline and southwestern U.S. start to dry on out.
The U.S. Geological Survey says this week's floods in Maine were likely the second worst in the state's recorded history. Now that the water has receded across the state, the focus is on cleanup and power restoration. About 50,000 customers are still without power this morning. Most are supposed to be back online by tomorrow. As for what's next, state leaders need to figure out how to prepare for the next historic flood. Brad Rogers has more.
With the Kennebec River still raging through downtown Skowhegan, Governor Mills visited the historic spinning mill. That's where crews have been working 14 months to restore this into new apartments, a restaurant, and a hotel before the flood set them back.
We had around 5 feet of water, standing water in the basement, and we had our millions of dollars worth of windows for storage down there. We had drywall that was just delivered where we were about to drywall the walls.
Sunday night, the National Weather Service forecasted moderate flooding and the possibility of 4 to 6 inches of rain in this dark orange area of the western mountains. Governor Mills says no forecast predicted that much rain to come down so quickly.
To the extent anybody thought there was going to be 5 or 6 inches of rain in any particular community, I don't think anyone thought that. Winds of up to 68, 70 miles an hour. Nobody in the National Weather Service ever told us that that might happen.
The governor warns powerful storms like this one will be happening more frequently in Maine.
Good question. What more could we have done?
Governor Mills says that's a question her administration must find answers to as it looks to develop new climate resiliency plans for the next big storms.
Show us the vulnerabilities. Let's be prepared for the next storm.
Economic and Community Development Commissioner Heather Johnson says businesses were flooded in dozens of Maine communities, including her hometown of Skowhegan.
Lots of business owners who lost significant amounts of their inventory, who lost key sales days in a holiday week that are really important to their operating ability.
She says the state will do all they can to help those businesses and homeowners get back on their feet.
Field crews from the USGS are in Maine looking at exactly how high the floodwaters rose. FEMA asked them to gather the data and compare it to other flooding events. The findings will be used for a flood insurance study. It may also help determine whether changes need to be made to bridges and other infrastructure and help make any changes to their flood inundation maps. Winter fog blanketed the Seattle area this week. The mantle was so thick only the tops of buildings could be seen from above. Meteorologist Shannon O'Donnell explains how that happens.
Well, hi there, everybody. I'm meteorologist Shannon O'Donnell here in Puget Sound, and the Emerald City, Seattle, was doing its best impersonation of Cloud City from Star Wars. Remember that? This week we have seen all of this fog really trapped in the Puget Sound basin, and just like those very interesting buildings out of Star Wars kind of floating above the clouds, that's how the beautiful Space Needle looked, with the Christmas tree atop no less, as we headed through this foggy late December week in Puget Sound. Reason being, we had quiet conditions, big area of high pressure over the top of us, and that has been keeping the Northwest very dry. But at the same time, it has been trapping all of the fog down near the surface. Notice we're surrounded by mountain ranges here in Seattle, somewhere underneath this very thick fog. Cascades to the east and to the west, we have the Olympic Mountains there on your way out to the coastline. Another shot of that fog, this one from nearby Bellevue. Again, winter radiation fog, very common all across the world this time of year, where you get those clear wintry nights, or in this case it was still very late fall earlier in the week. But regardless, all of the moisture we had picked up a couple of days before that, when we had the starry skies at night, was pulled out of the ground after dark and created that radiation fog. Again, in Puget Sound, we are surrounded by mountains, the Cascades and the Olympics, that created that natural bowl. And then we had that lid of high pressure on top of the bowl. Nothing to stir the fog out of the way with for a few days, so it just got thicker and thicker. Now things are changing in western Washington with our first winter storm of the season rolling in as we head into the weekend. For the National Weather Desk, I'm meteorologist Shannon O'Donnell.
And coming up on the National Weather Desk, we'll learn how temperature and moisture impact the shape of snowflakes. And we'll hear the story of how NORAD started tracking Santa nearly 70 years ago.
You are watching the National Weather Desk.
This week marks 1 year since a 6.4 magnitude earthquake rocked portions of Northern California. Aftershocks rattled the region for days. As Rudo Aguado explains, the impact from the earthquake is still being felt today.
Just days before Christmas last year, on December 20th, a 6.4 magnitude earthquake rattled Humboldt County, causing the majority of damage in the small community of Rio Dell before an aftershock of a 5.4 magnitude hit on New Year's Day.
Even though the community of Rio Dell and also Fortuna had more damage. That often happens with earthquakes. The spots that may be closest to the epicenter are not necessarily where the shaking was the strongest.
Humboldt County has been hit by earthquakes with a magnitude of 6 or higher for 2 years in a row on December 20th.
Well, if you look at it in terms of dollars, which is one way to talk about the size of an earthquake, we currently estimate roughly $32 million of damage, which makes it, well, the third most expensive earthquake since I moved here.
A year later, Humboldt County has made significant progress following the earthquake, but still has plenty of work to do as the impacts of the earthquake are still felt today.
Every part of the North Coast is potentially at risk. The good news is there's a whole lot of things we can do, both as individuals and as members of the community, to reduce the impacts of that next inevitable earthquake.
In Wisconsin, winter means ice fishing season, but this year the winter season is off to a slow start. Eric Peterson is in Green Bay, where locals say the ice has arrived, but not enough of it to start the fishing season.
What might be described as a small snow-fueled twister made its way across the distant shoreline of Chain Lake. On the bay nearby, people test their luck on the frozen surface.
I would definitely say that the ice was formed when it was supposed to. We were kind of on time. But again, it came on real quick, and then we just never got more. Within 2 days, we went from nothing to enough to walk on.
Mighty Fine Sports Shop and Fireworks part owner Derek Seletsky says ice first started forming on Lakewood area lakes at the end of November. He says ice thickness varies, but recent weather had an impact.
And then raining and warming, and ever since then we have not formed any more ice.
Some have an interest in the weather getting colder. Those at Lakewood Trailers say they have something many winter fishermen could really use. It's called the Ice Castle Fish House.
It's a very nice looking trailer. We've got holes in the floor for ice fishing. It's wired to put your cable TV or satellite TV in there. You could put your fish camera up on the TV in there. There's a heater, so there's a 20,000 BTU furnace inside of it. We've got a radio with speakers. There's even a cooktop stove in there if you want to spend the night and cook on it.
All you need is some ice.
Yeah, we need some ice, and it's coming.
On Monday morning, open water could be seen on this section of Maiden Lake. Derek Seletsky says the winter forecast for Lakewood could be better.
In the 40s. Looks like even for Christmas they're talking about a little bit of rain possibly.
You've probably heard that no two snowflakes are the same. The shape of each flake is impacted by the temperature and moisture in the air. Meteorologist Violet Skybor explains.
So let's start with temperatures that are close to freezing, around 25 to 32 degrees. That's when we see the shape of thin plates. It's a hexagonal shape, and it's usually fairly small, with a low amount of moisture in the atmosphere to form these. As we drop even colder to 21 to 25 degrees, that's when we start to see needle-like structures forming with a little bit more moisture in the atmosphere. Even colder than that, 14 to 21 degrees. That's when we see hollow columns starting to build. 10 to 14 degrees, we see that more typical snowflake shape of stellar plates. But the most common type of snowflake Usually when we see dry, fluffy snow that's great for sledding and downhill skiing and stuff like that is dendrites, and that usually forms with some colder temperatures, 3 to 10 degrees, and a high amount of moisture in the atmosphere is needed for the entire dendrite to produce all of those intricate patterns that we usually see with them. As we go even colder than that, it actually starts to go backwards with the shape. So we go back to stellar plates when we drop down to -8 to -3 degrees. Any colder than that, below -8, we go back to that column shape. So just take a look at the snow sometime and see if you can tell what type of shape or pattern it is. Maybe even try to get a picture of it for us.
The North American Aerospace Defense Command, better known as NORAD, has been tracking Santa on Christmas Eve since the 1950s. Emily Gracie recently spoke to someone from NORAD and found out the annual event actually started out because of a mistake.
Back in 1955, the first time NORAD got involved with this, it was actually called Continental Air Defense at the time, so CONAD. There was a typo in the newspaper for the phone number to call Santa. And so a child called into the Air Defense Command, and the colonel on the phone at that time, realizing the mistake and not wanting to let the child down, pretended to be Santa on the phone with that child that night. Since that time, we've grown our relationship with Santa, and we track him and make sure the kids around the world know where he's at on December 24th.
What does NORAD do the rest of the year?
Yes, thankfully we have the radars and the satellites and the airplanes to do our job every other day of the year to make sure that all of North America is safe, Canada and the United States, as well as Mexico. And we then use those same tools that we can use to track threats to North America. We use those to track Santa on Christmas Eve.
What kind of tools?
So we have satellites that are stationed 22,000 miles above the Earth. They track infrared, so when Rudolph puts that red nose out there, we can see him coming around the world. And then we also have radars around Alaska and Canada. And then we have fighter aircraft, including F-15s, F-35s, F-22s here in the United States, and F-18s up in Canada that allow us to get a closer look if we needed to.
How can we track them?
The website is very neat because you can start right now looking at lots of different information we have on there and games for families throughout the month leading up to Christmas. But on the night that it happens, you'll have those on there. And we'll have a call center in here. We get several 100,000 calls on Christmas Eve. I was actually working shift here in our operations center last Christmas Eve, and I was able to track Santa the entire night while the event was going on. But it was quite awesome to see the tracking ability and all the people that were interested in where he was at and what was going on.
To hear much more about NORAD, including Santa's expected path around the world this year, check out this week's episode of our podcast, Off the Radar. You'll also hear from an atmospheric scientist about weather conditions at the North Pole this time of the year. Find Off the Radar anywhere you listen to podcasts.
You are watching the National Weather Desk.
North Dakota is a hotspot for finding fossils, and just this week, coal miners made a rare find, a complete mammoth tusk. Bella Craft tells what was so special about this discovery.
I was frankly very surprised.
The tusk wasn't spotted right away. It got scooped up, loaded onto a truck, and then dumped out. That's when the miners spotted it.
It's just kind of one of those series of miraculous events.
Though the tusks are heavy, they're extremely fragile. Since this one was complete, it gave paleontologists a clue that other bones were out there. They found more than 20, including ribs, a shoulder blade, a tooth, and parts of the hips.
Got a big chunk of it. This wound up being one of the most complete mammoth skeletons that we have found in North Dakota ever. Usually we just find an isolated tooth or an isolated bone.
Paleontologists say this is a rare find. Mammoths were one of the largest animals, yet they have become cleverly hidden beneath the ground.
There's a lot of state to cover, and if you don't have a lot of eyes looking, you don't find very many of them.
Paleontologists say it was the mine's meticulous digging process that helped them find more bones.
Thank you for joining us. I'm meteorologist Matt Ritter. Make it a great Friday, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you right back here on Monday.